So should we give it 2 more minutes till 5 past and then get started, Nora?
Sounds good.
Although, yeah, even if it's a small group of us, perhaps it's a good, I'm sure it will be useful in some way. Put your names on there.
Next time, learning experience.
Well, it's 5 past, Nora. Shall we get started?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Oh, so you don't need, I guess you don't need to make an introduction then.
Why don't I
Nora?
go ahead and do that, because we can just treat it as a
Okay.
So, okay. So, welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining us here for our webinar by under the umbrella of the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program, and we are very proud to present to you the Bioregional and their One Planet Living program. And Bioregional has been a really valued partner for a while now, and as many of you know, they have also, well, actually they're a MAC member, and they've also hosted one of our MAC meetings. And some of you have been at BedZED, which is part of their One Planet Living. I'm sure Sue will tell you more about it, but it's been a great inspiration to all of us. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over the virtual microphone to Sue, who will be able to tell you more, and then afterwards we will have some time for Q&A. Maybe just a few housekeeping remarks. As I said, if you have questions, you can best is to keep them for the end. If it's anything that there's an issue of understanding, feel free to use the chat box. And please, while you're not speaking, we do ask you to mute yourselves, because we have an echo otherwise. So thanks again, and over to you, Sue.
Thanks very much, Nora, and welcome everybody. So my name is Sue Riddlestone. I'm Chief Executive and co-founder of Bioregional. And I have my colleagues here with me, Marina, who is going to give a demonstration of the One Planet Living digital platform in the second part of this webinar, and my colleague Flo, who's going to manage the technical side of things. So if you have any questions, you can be chatting to Flo on the chat there. So today we have 1 hour, and in the first 20 minutes, I'm going to introduce the One Planet Living framework and how it's being used with some case studies of how it's being used around the world for it's been used for around $30 billion of new build developments. It's been used by companies, cities, organisations, schools and universities in 60 countries around the world. And it's an easy way to plan, deliver and communicate sustainable consumption and production and sustainable living generally. Then in the second session, second 20-minute session, we'll have an interactive session where we will actually have a go at using One Planet Living, using our new digital platform. And then in the third session, we will, third part of the session, we will have question and answer and discussion. So I hope that's what everyone's expecting. I'll proceed. So first of all, to briefly introduce Bioregional. So we're definitely championing a better way to live. We're working with partners to create places and products and services which enable people to live within the natural limits of our planet and leave space for wildlife and wilderness. And we call this One Planet Living. We're a charity. We've won awards for being a social enterprise, so we take a very entrepreneurial and practical and business approach to things. We were established in 1994 in the UK, but we are working across the world. As Nora said, we're part of the One Planet 10YFP network. We're members of the Sustainable Buildings and Construction MAC. We're also members of the Procurement, Tourism and Consumer Information programs as well of the One Planet network. So as I said, we're very practical and we work on sustainable living through new build communities and regeneration and on business operations. We always work in partnership in an advisory role and through our own associated companies. We always use our One Planet Living framework and we train others to use it and we make it freely available. And we aim to leverage what we do, measure and tell the stories of our work to inform policy and industry practice. And that led us to working at the UN level on the Rio+20 process and as the NGO global focal point for sustainable consumption and production in the post-2015 framework to develop the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2015, we did all commit, the whole world committed to take action with the goals and the Paris Agreement. So it's very much all about scaling and replicating what we know and implementation. And I think one of the things that's come up is sometimes it's hard to explain what sustainable consumption and production is. And when we were working on the UN process, of course, we were trying to influence diplomats who 1 week they'll be talking about disarmament and the next week they'll be talking about, I don't know, infant mortality, and they don't know that much about sustainability. So we found that One Planet Living was a good way to communicate sustainable consumption and production, and we like to use the ecological footprint as particularly as a communications tool. It is based on data. It's not a precise science, but it gives us the order of magnitude of the challenge that we face. So here you can see the world ecological footprint, and you can see how this is about what we're consuming from what the Earth can produce every year, and also the carbon in terms of the amount of atmosphere, sea, trees that we need to actually reabsorb that carbon. And you can see this chart starts in 1961, and at that time we were actually living within our planetary means, but there were only 3 billion people on the planet now, and now there are 7 and rising. And so although we've become more efficient, we're actually consuming around 50% more, depending on who you talk to, than the planet can actually produce, or pollution than the planet can absorb annually. And different countries are consuming at different rates. So you can see here that, I'm not sure if I got the cursor, if it would show anything. No, yes. You can see here Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, very high consuming countries. This would be the sort of One Planet level, that line down the bottom there. So that would be the sustainable level, and you can see the carbon in purple. And European countries tend to be around this level. And then so many countries don't have enough, and they need to grow and develop. And so, you know, really at the moment, the world isn't very fair in terms of how resources are being used. So I think Goal 12 SCP is very much the goal for us richer nations to do something about, but also to work with less developed countries to help them to establish their infrastructure in a sustainable way. And a way that we found is good to talk about this is to say that, well, if everyone lived a sort of global middle class lifestyle, as we do in Europe, or as you would in parts of Shanghai or Delhi, we would need 3 planets to support us, and we don't have 3 planets. And I always remember a Chinese business person saying to me through an interpreter, I can't get those 3 planets out of my head. So I think that's always a good sign that you've got through to someone. And of course, it's not just about the resource consumption. You can see here the United Nations Human Development Index mapped against the ecological footprint on the right side there, and the HDI on the bottom. And again, back in 1961, you can see the blue line there. We had a bit more space to actually achieve sustainability, and with more people on the planet, it takes down that. It's almost like how much of a cake is there to share out around the whole world. It takes down that amount, and the only countries that get close to high human development within the Earth's limits are actually some of the South American countries, where they have high social, good social infrastructure, and also might be growing organically and having a more sustainable lifestyle. So what we need is, we need one planet for everybody, where we can all live happy, healthy lives within those natural limits and leave space for wildlife and wilderness, which is really important. And one of the things I love about my work here at Bioregional, is that I've seen how it is really possible, whether it's the homes that we live in, like BedZED, ecovillage, which inspired us to work on One Planet Living, or products. It absolutely is possible. We just need to do everything we know we need to do everywhere, all the time. So that's easy. And as I say, BedZED was where One Planet Living was born, and that's an eco-village that we worked on back in 2002, 100 homes, workspace. We actually went ahead with the project because we needed a new office. And at BedZED, we tried to think about all of that 3 planets, how that breaks down, and all elements of our ecological footprint. So you can see there on the left the housing, the impact of housing and construction of houses, home energy use, transport, food, consumer goods, and at the far right side there you can see the sort of shared impact, or the shared infrastructure that we all have to add on to our personal footprint. So we tried to tackle all of that at BedZED and had a number of strategies: energy, building materials, transport, water, waste, food, and so on. And we tried to make it easy for people to do the right thing from a sustainability point of view, and difficult to do the wrong thing. So a place to put your bicycle just inside the front door, car club, so you could join a car sharing club rather than having to own a car, but also having public transport nearby. Okay, what we found was that this actually led to a community which, although it was a sustainable community, people just really liked living there, and the main thing when surveyed that they said they liked was it's the community spirit and the social side being good. And I think that's partly to do with de-emphasising cars and you know, having that sort of shared ethos of a sustainable community. So after we did BedZED, many people came to us and said, we'd like to do a BedZED, can you help us? So we systematised it into a practical tool, and you can see here those strategies became these 10 principles. So from health and happiness, equity in the local economy, and you would use these 10 principles to make an action plan. So, you know, think about all of these when making a plan for a project. So from health and happiness, equity in the local economy, culture and community, thinking about biodiversity, how we're using the land and making space for nature, sustainable water, how we use water, how water's managed in the area, local and sustainable food. Food is a massive part of our greenhouse gas emissions and our land take and our footprint. Travel and transport, you can use as much energy in travel and transport as you can heating and lighting your home. Materials and products, construction materials can be 70% of the impact of a new building. We can be sometimes very wasteful, and so zero waste, the circular economy, and of course we need to be zero carbon by 2050 in line with the Paris Agreement, and sooner than that in developed nations, and indeed many countries like Finland have actually come out and said we'll be going zero carbon 2025, 2030. So this is a design framework, so it's based on those natural resource limits and equity, this fair share of carbon and ecological footprint, and these 10 principles. And we have a set of goals and guidance which people can use to help them to make a plan. And as I mentioned, it's being used for many projects all around the world, and I'm going to mention some of them to you in a moment. But first of all, I'd just like to explain a little bit about the process, because the process is just as important as the framework itself. So as I mentioned, for example, with BedZED, that point about gathering the information, you know, where do the impacts arise, what do we have to work with, thinking about that in the context of the project or the way that we're going to use One Planet Living, and then having workshops to create a One Planet Living action plan to actually enable One Planet Living. So there you can see a workshop we had in China for a 6,000 home project we did there. And in the workshops, you'd involve key decision makers, stakeholders. So you'd want to get the finance director there. If it was in a city, you might want to get the mayor, or, you know, depending on the size of the city, or the local politicians. You'd want to get a local resident. And then you'd work together to co-create an action plan. And it's very much about winning hearts and minds and working together to achieve this plan so that people have a buy-in to it. And then once you've made your plan, you get on and implement it and publish that plan and share the learning of it, monitor it, talk about it. And at Bioregional, we see a big part of our role to share and communicate about this. This project in Brighton, we were able to build 172 apartments within the normal range of build costs, and it just looks like a standard development when you go around, and it was all within the normal cost. But it's a car-free development. It has an on-site composter for all the food waste. It has on-site allotments, even though it's an apartment block, and you know, many other features, very low impact cement, for example, in the construction. And you can, with all of these projects I'm going to talk to you about, you can actually have a look at their action plans on our website and case studies to get more ideas. And as we build the digital platform, these case studies will all be on the digital platform as well. We're also using One Planet Living to build larger scale developments. So this is the Bicester Eco Town in Oxfordshire, and the first 400 homes have been built, and the planning policy used One Planet Living as a guide to actually create planning policy that enables One Planet Living. So that's another example. One Planet Living was used to write the sustainability strategy for the London 2012 Olympic bid, and many things came out of that, because we were thinking about consumption-based Scope 3 impacts right at the very beginning of the project. It influenced the way it showed that the construction was going to be the main impact, and so this was able to sort of flow through in terms of the contracts that were let and the competition for the buildings, and huge savings. I think 10% of the steel was used in the London Stadium, including, which you can see in the picture there, including recycled gas pipes running around the top there, and removable seating, so that you could, because these venues were only going to be used for a short time, hiring rather than buying, so that these things could be reused rather than wasted or leaving a big white elephant. There were some huge cost savings as a result of that. I think the sustainability team cost about £5 million and saved hundreds of millions of pounds, as well as it was a lovely event with wildlife meadows. You can see there, fantastic recycling, and it was such a joyful, lovely project. And because the whole construction industry in Europe, I think, worked on that project, it really influenced the industry and led to a sustainable events standard, ISO 2012-1. And one of the key things about any of these One Planet Living projects, and perhaps any sustainability project, Lord Sebastian Coe at the very beginning, and being involved at the very beginning, was really important. He was the decision maker. He wanted sustainability to be a part of it. We pitched this to him, and he bought into it and made sure that there was that leadership from the top, that it was important, and it sort of flowed through then. And similarly with, you can take a One Planet holiday. So this project in Paris, Village Nature, the chief exec of Pierre Vacances, Gérard Bremont, came to see us and said he wanted to do a world-leading project. And 10 years later, in fact, possibly a bit longer, this project is now built in Paris. It's thousands of holiday apartments, very mainstream, and yet it's zero carbon heat from a geothermal bore that's also supplying heat to land, which is about 8 kilometres away. It was a forest, and so people were like, why are you building in a forest? But actually, it's been planted out to attract biodiversity, and there's all sorts of species being increasing as a result of the project. And you can have a lovely time, we went there for our staff away day, going down the water slides into your geothermally heated water. It's great fun. As I mentioned, we also used One Planet Living on a huge project in China, in Guangzhou. Again, a senior decision maker wanted to do it. When you go there, it's a bit like BedZED in China, but it was, in a way, difficult to implement some of the things at the time. This was started being built in 2005. It's completed now. And it really needed the local authority to cooperate, really, with the transport strategies, the waste strategies. And at the time, for example, you couldn't connect in renewable energy to the Chinese grid. So that influenced what we were able to do in that project. But of course, China changing so rapidly, and is now, that wouldn't be an issue these days. This is the Masdar Eco City in the United Arab Emirates. And this is an example in a very hot climate, the creativity of the architects in response to the One Planet Living brief, looking at traditional ways of cooling. In the United Arab Emirates, it's so hot, people just go from the air-conditioned hotel to the air-conditioned car, and weren't even using the outside space. So we looked to the ways where we used to keep it used to be kept cool, so orienting the buildings away from the sun, using shading, using water and plants. And you can see the square here, which I've been there, and it's really true. It's actually 10 degrees cooler there than if you were in a nearby, more traditional, lots of concrete and glass, sort of American style skyscrapers. So it really works to to reduce energy use, but also enable people to meet each other outside of the buildings. We are working in Durban in South Africa. Colleague there, Sarah Olsen of Bioregional South Africa, has been working on with citizens there on economic development, schools, homes, and most recently we're now working with Durban as part of our One Planet Cities project, where the citizens are making a plan to show how they will contribute to Durban's very stretching targets for sustainability. And in cities, if you don't get the citizens involved and do this as a partnership, we can never achieve sustainability. And we did measure for London whether One Planet Living could be achieved in cities. And we did actually find that with 64 measures, it really was possible. And this led to a standard for a way of actually measuring the consultant products and services, also sadly flood products, sort of looking ahead, dealing with climate change. They were one of the first retailers here to stock a lot of flood products, and when we've had climate change induced flooding here, it's been very useful to be able to pop down to B&Q to get the thing that goes in your doorway to stop the floods coming in. They're also using it for their own operations, and they are committed to it for their own operations, and they've made some big achievements there, and they are working to achieve zero carbon. It's moving now to actually buying their own dedicated renewable energy, but they've done a huge amount, a third reduction through operational efficiencies. Also, there's a company in Mexico, South America's largest refrigeration equipment supplier, who've adopted One Planet Living, and they like it because it's easy to communicate with their employees what their sustainability plan is. So all of these great examples we took, I think they inspire everyone that it can be done, and that's what we love to do. We love to talk about them and show people that it can be done. And when we got involved in the Rio+20 process, we dragged B&Q over to, well, actually we didn't have to drag them. They were so excited to get involved in the UN processes, and others, the Mexican company, they came along and they presented to those diplomats, and we took the One Planet Living framework and said, look, it can be done. And I think that really helped encourage everyone to get on with implementation. And One Planet Living is all about implementation. So you can use One Planet Living to plan, deliver, communicate SCP, the Sustainable Development Goals and Sustainability, and to help you and to help everybody, we have lots of free resources on our website, goals and guidance, a manual, all these project case studies. We also offer training. It's very affordable. We've kept the cost right down, but we do have to, because we're a charity, but we do have to cover the cost of our time. But it's very affordable, and it can be used. Once you've had the training, then you can use it for your organisation, or you can offer, with a bit further training, you can actually offer One Planet Living services as a sustainability integrator. It's a network of users, and the new digital platform has been built, oneplanet.com, where people can digitally create, manage, publish and share and monitor their action plan. We also like to recognise where people have done a great job and it's an exemplary project. So you could go ahead, use One Planet Living, make an action plan, and we might never know about it. We'd like to know, but we don't always know. But if you want it recognised, then we can review it or get someone else to review it, and then we can give recognition. So we usually offer that sort of Planet with a Heart logo that you saw on the slides as recognition, and we also, where people want to work with us, as they did at, say, some of these projects I've talked to you about, we work in a partnership and advisory capacity. So those are all the ways that we can help you to use One Planet Living. And we're now going to start moving towards a demonstration of the digital platform, having a go at using One Planet Living, using the digital platform. I'm going to do an interactive session, a workshop scenario, and I'd like you to imagine we're going to, and this was inspired by a real project that we're wanting to do in the One Planet Network. So the Sustainable Buildings and Construction group want to do this project called Kuishi, which is about working where there are existing social housing programs of governments in sub-Saharan Africa to help make them more sustainable. So we picked a new build, 250 homes in a sub-Saharan African city. And you can choose to be a character in this workshop. You can either be some sort of government or city government official. You could be a construction contractor, or you could be a person who will live there. So it could be someone who's already living in the area or someone who might move in. So if you imagine, we've already done the analysis, we've understood where the impacts arise, and now we're actually going to be looking at those 10 principles and thinking about how we're actually going to make a One Planet Living action plan. So an important thing to say when you're implementing One Planet Living is we need to think about the outcomes, the end result we want to happen, and that's very much our focus in this quick demonstration now. And then, of course, once you've got your outcome, then you need to think about the activities or the interventions that would be required to actually achieve it, and some indicators to know how we're on track to get there. But we're going to particularly focus on the outcome and maybe actions if we have time. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Marina, who's going to call up the platform and get us started.
Yes, indeed. Bear with us one moment while we just swap our screen over to get to the browser, as the tool works via a browser.
And so we're going to show you the 10 principles to the side on the platform screen. You'll see it there. And then if you could call out or on the chat, think about what outcomes we should add to our One Planet Living action plan.
So just to reiterate the difference between outcomes and actions, an example of an outcome might be everyone is able to reach a place of employment via sustainable transport means, and the action could be ensuring that some feature of public transport or bike or walking route. Connect exactly what we just talked about. I'm going to put my action in equity and local economy. Sorry, my outcome. So my outcome will be all residents can reach their place of employment. And I'm going to put that under equity and local economy. I'm going to add that as an outcome. And that appears here. It's a bit massive because I'm quite zoomed in. I'll just zoom out a little. And then my action was, so my first action is going to be interview target demographics to understand employment centres. Yeah, employment centres. Let's see what that is. Okay, and we'll give that also an equity and local economy tag. We'll add that as an action. It appears on our tool. I can now link it by selecting link over here and just clicking and dragging. So an indicator for this could be, for example, percentage of residents who can reach employment, or let's say easily reach employment, and let's make it measurable as well within let's say a 30-minute journey. And we're going to add that as an indicator also under equity and local economy. So here we go. this is how we start to create these links between what we're doing to make sure that what we're doing is logical, and that's why we have this outcome action indicator structure. And to think about how all of these principles together really need to link together and really need to create synergies between each other. If I was a developer, I could theoretically look at this and just say, right, well, I'll give everyone a parking space and I'll put a great big highway down the middle of the development, and I will just put that, I'll drive that straight into the central business district. But that wouldn't be very one planet, would it? That would just embed car ownership. So let's go to travel and transport. So we'll go to another outcome. Journeys to work achieved by sustainable means, and that's going to come under travel and transport, and that starts to this thing about how people reach their place of employment. In fact, I'm going to drag from this one to that one. The links will show up with the colour of the principle that you start with, just in case that helps to understand. So an action that we have here, so remember what Sue said a while ago in the presentation about making it easy to do the right thing and difficult to do the wrong thing, without meaning to sound too judgmental about right and wrong there. We could say an action will be to include a proportion of car-free homes. And we will put that here. So that's an example of making it difficult to do the less good thing. And I'm going to have another action relatedly, which is design in dedicated mobility hub for public transport, or we could just say stops for public transport. And I'm going to put that also under travel and transport. I'm going to add that action, and I'm going to link that back to here, and I'm also going to link it again to here, because that's about how people get around and how they get to where they need to go. And we'll have another indicator as well. Let's say 60% of residents, let's just say percentage of residents who use public or active transport as their commuting means. And again, give it a colour. And again, attach that indicator to the outcome, so how well we know we're doing when people are occupying a place. So have we had no suggestions coming in through yet? So yeah, these don't really specifically apply only to a sub-Saharan African city. I would almost want to apply these to any new development we're doing, and these are quite similar to some that we are developing for a new town in the UK at the moment.
We've got a comment that's just come in.
Yes.
Output: the development provides employment for local professionals. Action: data. Indicators: percentage of local jobs created and percentage of number of jobs. Number of jobs for women and the youth. Do you want me to go like?
I will need that again. Yeah, this is sounding really good. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So output is the development provides employment for local professionals.
Yeah, and that will be under equity and local economy, I'm assuming.
I think so. Yeah, it's not specified.
Yeah.
And then action is local business ecosystem developed.
So the action would almost be develop local business ecosystem. Yeah. Okay.
With a startup incubator.
It's funny you should say that, Pekka, because that's exactly what we did at the Vista Eco Town. And in the planning policy statement, we said 1 job for every house.
Ah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Which the planning local authority have had an issue trying to figure out how to do that, but it makes them think about it.
Okay.
Was there any more to that one? So with startup incubator.
Yeah, and the indicators are the number of local jobs created and the number of jobs for women and youth.
Yeah, number of jobs created. So that is equity and local economy. And I'm going to create another indicator. Do we want number of jobs created for women and youth, or do we want percentage of jobs which will go to women and youth? I suppose it could be either, couldn't it? And then we can work out the
percentage.
Percentage? Is this percentage of that? Okay, great. Percentage of jobs, local jobs created for women and youth. Brilliant.
I could also put another comment about biking in sub-Saharan Africa doesn't always support safe solutions.
That's true. That's true. Depending on how much control you have over, how the road's designed that connects your development to somewhere else. Yeah. That's true. That is
also
true.
A really good comment from Kat, saying, agreeing with Pekka and saying that local knowledge and workshopping comes in really handy with those kind of
absolutely issues. 100% right. You can't sit in a desk in a different country and assume that you know what's right. So yeah, it's so important. So I would say that needs to be its own action or its own outcome. So local community is consulted to understand conditions on the ground before design process starts, right? Okay, so I'm just going to link these ones together. So that's an action, that's an action. I'm going to link this back to here. So let's have this outcome then. Or do we want an outcome or an action that the local community is consulted to inform the realities of the development? Yeah?
Well, I guess we would hope that they would be involved in creating the original plan. Perhaps there could, the outcome could be a tenant management organisation or some sort of.
Yeah, I think Pekka said here, engaging the local community to develop applicable solutions. So I guess that's more of an action.
An action, yeah, that's right. Engage local community to develop, what was it, sorry, applicable solutions?
Yeah.
I like that, yeah.
Also, they may know better what might work and what not.
Oh, completely right, yeah. We can't assume that a solution from one place can just be dropped into another place. That is absolutely right.
Great, thanks, Pekka.
Let's say, I'm going to say that's going to be, but could be any of them really. So actually, I'm not going to link that action to any of the principles because that needs to run throughout the entire strategy really. Mm-hmm. So let's link that to local employment. And let's link it to the journeys. Great, so this is starting to shape up really nicely, I think. Okay, let's go to health and happiness. Let's think about what this place can do to help people have a better quality of life in the day-to-day. So I wonder what the, yes?
I've just got a question too.
Go for it.
You don't have any pre-selected list of sustainable options, just the headings, so you start from scratch.
That's correct, yeah.
Although the goals and guidance will give some good ideas.
And I'll just show you where you can get to the goals and guidance. This may move, but at the moment you can get really easy to them here. Let's go to the, here we go. So if you go to oneplanet.com, you choose principles. Let's say we're looking at health and happiness. And let's say we are, you can find the guidance documents here. Let's say that we're a city or a community. Let's say community, yeah. So we click on communities from that principle. And they've designed it in a nifty way. It will take you to our goals and guidance documents, and then once it's fully loaded, it should jump to the page that gives you guidance specifically on that principle. Yeah, there you go. So we have these lovely PDFs that have lots and lots of helpful sort of tips and tricks. So these are examples of KPIs, indicators, possible targets you might want to have. Obviously not exhaustive and not prescriptive, but just to get you thinking and to think about what's been done elsewhere. So, for example, what happened at Serengeti, which is a destination.
Just got a question again.
Yes.
Where do you have cultural aspects? So talking about Africa.
Okay, I would say probably culture and community, which is one of.
And it would be very locally applicable. So that's why we don't make the principles too prescriptive, because culture and community is relevant everywhere, but it would be a locally different culture.
Yeah, absolutely. These things vary from city to city, never mind country to country. So yeah,
so the wisdom would come from
an outcome that we have put into a kind of paraphrasing of an outcome that we put into a town that we're helping to develop a plan for in the UK right now is something along the lines of development reflects the needs and ambitions of both the existing surrounding communities and the incoming community who will live there. So I'll just drop that in here unless anyone has anything to add to that. Development reflects the needs, culture and ambitions of the residents and neighbours. And then I'm going to put that under culture and community. I'm going to add that as an outcome. And obviously that needs to be strongly linked to this action we have at the centre here about engaging the local community to find out their actual lived experiences, their knowledge of what it's like to be.
And does that link to this tenant management once it's up and running?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Got just another question. How do you document the results of the workshop?
Well, this is kind of the means of documenting some of the results. It doesn't have to go through this platform, but this is one way of doing it.
So when you saw on the PowerPoint slide that I showed you that you can do it with the flip charts and the post-it notes, around tables, real time, and then you can put it in here afterwards. And we can imagine how tech savvy everybody is increasingly. You could potentially do this live real time during a workshop as well, so that it's being built at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do understand though that in not all contexts, well, in maybe much of the world, it might be the case that not everyone has access to an internet connection that could show this easily. So I would say it needs to be accessible in a few different ways. This is just one way to kind of do the admin and organise it.
So we have a PDF of a toolkit that people can download to use. Actually, our website is just swapping from one website to another over the next few weeks. So we'll make sure we send you links to that after this webinar. But that is the way that it's been. 6,000 organisations, all in 60 countries around the world, and people just used it for their own projects.
Yeah.
That way. So there are templates that you can fill in.
I'll just mention that this graph and kind of mind mapping is one way that I think is really useful, especially those who are a bit like me and are quite visual in the way that they work. You can also do all of this in a table view, which looks like this. You can do all the same stuff, and you can also manage your sources. So because we're presenting to you guys, I chucked in a few random UN documents as sources, and you could link those to some of the things you've got in your plan. Anyway, yes?
Does it work on a smartphone so you can see the content?
That's a good point.
Yes.
Does it? I've not tried to use it on a
It's
smartphone.
designed to work on a smartphone,
So it's
it
mobile
might be
friendly.
quite hard to see.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
When
point.
it's finished, then you have a document, and as Marina was just showing, once you finish your action plan, you can look at it in a document view. And will this actually show what we've done?
It'll show
Yes.
what we've done already, yeah. So you can see my horrible dismembering of the UN logo there. I wanted to make sure that we weren't making clear that we weren't trying to actually pretend to be you guys. So yeah, everything that you've populated in that graph view just appears here. But I think we should emphasise that while this tool is wonderful, it's not the only way that you can do One Planet Living. It's just, this is a way to demonstrate so that we can all remotely work through the ideas that we have to do this action plan.
And you can, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can look at the One Planet action plans of various projects on our website, and again we can send some links afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely we can.
I've just got another comment through saying
Yes.
internet is not everywhere and mobile phones work off grid.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's really important. Absolutely. I have read some kind of ridiculous statistics somewhere that said that more people have mobile phones than toothbrushes worldwide.
Yeah.
So that's
And
really
toilets, I think.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think I've pretty much shown how the tool works. Do we want to do any more thinking about how we would build our plan, build our organisation, and so on?
This is Pekka, if I may ask, what was the concrete outcome of the Masdar case you presented from your end? I mean,
Masdar?
Masdar,
Yes.
yes.
So we did use,
Because, just to explain, because there's no public transport there, there's a lot of embodied carbon in what was built there, and it's a very special case. But how do you see that supports One Planet Living?
so when we first worked on the Mazda, it was the very early days, right at the beginning. Foster and Partners, the architects, were working on it and asked us to get involved. Then once it developed more of a momentum, actually lots of other people started working on it, and I think the funding ran out. But there was designed in a link, some very modern, this was what they wanted to do, sort of pods, transport pods link. But if you go to Mazda, it is a little bit out of the way, and they haven't actually finished building it all out. But if you go to that part that has been built, you can really feel the sustainability. But I think they just never managed to follow through. And in fact, we only worked on it in the first year. And then after that, lots of big name consultants came in, and hundreds of them were working on it. So we don't call that a One Planet community, but I think it's a nice example of how One Planet Living thinking, where you look to the traditional ways of doing things and the culture, can deal with the biggest issue for them, which was the heat.
I think that's another piece of really interesting learning as well, actually having done that and having had One Planet Living used at the start, but then obviously they didn't quite have the commitment to build it all the way through.
Yeah.
So I think that in itself is a really interesting piece of learning, and the transport thing comes up over and over and over again, especially with new developments that aren't linked to trains or buses yet. I don't know how much public transport is in the culture in where Mazda is, but yeah,
a little bit.
Okay.
But I think location, the choice of location where you build.
Yes.
So with the eco towns in the UK, the location in Oxfordshire was chosen because it's where there's a very good train hub going to 2 different locations, to Cambridge, to Birmingham, to London, to Oxford. So it was chosen because of the location. So you would be careful where you build to help support sustainable transport options. I think we have actually moved on to the Q&A part and the discussion. I mean, one of the things I hoped was that we could use One Planet Living on the Quishi project. And I think Sherpa's very good, and One Planet Living is also very good, and there was a lot of similarities as a tool. I think we could perhaps use them both in different ways.
Do we have any further questions or comments coming through yet? No? Okay. Got 3 minutes.
So I think it would be great if there was a way that we could pick up on this and use One Planet Living in one of the SBC projects, as I mentioned. From our perspective at Bioregional, we know that we can achieve sustainable consumption and production and the SDGs. We've got till 2030. We've absolutely got to do it. It's all about implementation now. And that is the role of the One Planet Network, to help support implementation. And I think One Planet Living can really help to communicate and plan for SCP. So love to speak to you some more about it in the coming weeks if you have any reflections on how we could do more. And look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, it's been fun. I was really happy to see all those suggestions from people as well. Good questions coming through too. We can circulate some resources after this, I hope.
Okay, thanks very much, One Planet Network, for hosting. Thanks, Nora.
Thanks very much.
And, goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, all. This was great, and it's really, really impressive what you have done and what you're still continuing to do. I mean, so applied and so relevant. So I think there's a lot to learn here. So thanks so much, and let's see if we can repeat sometime in the future. And thanks all for joining, and have a nice day or evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.